Chapter 1. The Weight of Knowing. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has no name in most languages. It is not the exhaustion of labor, not the tiredness that comes after a long day of physical work. It is the exhaustion of seeing clearly in a world that has decided, collectively, that clarity is too uncomfortable to tolerate. Some men carry this exhaustion the way others carry old injuries. Quietly, carefully, never mentioning it in polite company, learning to move around it so that no one notices the limp. Marcus had this exhaustion. He was 34 years old, and he had stopped explaining himself approximately 6 years prior. Not out of arrogance. That is the easy misreading. He stopped explaining himself the way a surgeon eventually stops explaining the procedure to a patient who has already decided not to listen. The energy required to translate your inner world into language that another person will not use against you is an energy better spent elsewhere. He had learned this slowly and at great cost. He worked in urban planning. He spent his days designing the invisible architecture of how people move through cities, the invisible systems that determine whether a neighborhood breathes or suffocates. His colleagues liked him in the way that people like someone they find slightly unreadable, professionally competent, socially present, but never overly available. He laughed when something was genuinely funny, which meant he laughed less than everyone else in the room, and people noticed this without knowing why it unsettled them. What no one in that office understood was that Marcus had spent the better part of a decade being systematically dismantled, not by external circumstance, but by his own hand. This is the story of that dismantling and what was left when it was finished. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Self-Betrayal. Nietzsche wrote that the higher man is he who does not wait for external permission to become what he is. But Nietzsche wrote this from a room in Switzerland, in a state of declining health, increasingly disconnected from the social machinery that grinds down the superior man before he even has a chance to identify himself as such. What Nietzsche did not write, or what he buried in footnotes that most readers skip, is that the superior man's first and most dangerous enemy is not society. It is his own desperate, almost biological need to be understood. Marcus had been understood once, or he had believed he was. At 26, he had been in a relationship with a woman who matched his pace, who read the same books not to seem intellectual, but because she found genuine sustenance in them, who could sit in silence with him in a way that felt like conversation rather than avoidance. When that relationship ended, not dramatically, but in the slow, glacial way that commitments sometimes dissolve under the weight of diverging inner lives, Marcus did something that took him years to recognize as catastrophic. He began to shrink. He began to make himself more comprehensible to people who were not her. He began to flatten his edges so that he could fit more smoothly into the spaces available to him. This is what existential psychology calls the fundamental betrayal. Not the betrayal of others, the betrayal of the self in the service of social legibility. The psychologist Rollo May identified it as the central wound of modern man, the sacrifice of authentic being for the security of social belonging. We make ourselves smaller. We translate ourselves into dialects that others can understand. And over time, we forget that we were ever speaking another language at all. The self does not disappear in a single dramatic moment. It erodes, it thins. It becomes something that can be held comfortably in other people's hands, which means it is no longer really yours. By 28, Marcus had become excellent at this. He had developed a persona, not a false one exactly, but a reduced one, social, functional, affable. He could enter any professional gathering and perform competence with such precision that no one questioned the performance. He received promotions. He was invited to the right dinners. He had, by every external metric, succeeded. His hands were always slightly cold, a thing he had noticed but never examined. His sleep was shallow. He had not read a book that genuinely disturbed him in over a year because he had stopped seeking disturbance. He had begun to optimize for comfort, which is another way of saying he had begun to die. Chapter 3. The Descent. The moment of rupture arrived the way all genuine ruptures arrive. Not loudly, but with the quiet certainty of something that has been true for a long time, finally refusing to pretend otherwise. Marcus was in a meeting, quarterly review. His team was presenting a proposal for a new transit corridor in the city's eastern district. And the proposal was good. He knew it was good. And more importantly, he knew exactly why it was good in ways his superiors did not have the vocabulary to articulate. He watched them misread it. He watched them approve it for the wrong reasons. He watched himself smile and nod at their misreading, as if their version of the project were the one that mattered. He excused himself to use the restroom. He stood in front of the mirror for longer than was socially explainable. His heart was doing something unusual, not racing exactly, but present in a way hearts usually are not. He could feel it pressing against the inside of his chest with a strange, slow urgency, as though it were knocking on a door from the inside. His reflection looked back at him with an expression he could not immediately identify. And then he could. It was the expression of someone who has been waiting. Someone who has been patient for a very long time and whose patience has just run out. Carl Jung wrote about what he called the shadow, the repository of everything we have refused to integrate into our conscious identity. The shadow is not evil, despite its name. It is simply unincorporated. It contains the truths we found too dangerous, the drives we found too inconvenient, the aspects of the self that did not receive social approval and were therefore buried rather than developed. Jung's most important and least celebrated observation was this: the shadow does not become harmless by being ignored. It becomes more powerful. It organizes. It develops its own coherence, underground, and eventually it surfaces. Not in the way you would have chosen, not at the time you would have chosen, but with the full authority of everything you spent years pretending was not there. Marcus drove home that evening with both hands on the wheel and something buzzing in his sternum that he could not name. The city moved past the window the way it always did. The same streets, the same lights, the same carefully engineered infrastructure he had spent his career helping to design. But something in the quality of his perception had shifted. The city looked for the first time in years like a system, like an architecture that was legible, like a thing that could be understood and altered and improved. He had not looked at his own life this way in a very long time. He was not yet sure he was ready to, but the knocking from inside had started. And knocking, once it begins, is very difficult to stop hearing. Chapter 4: The Counter-Truth. Here is where the story could become a simple parable. The man sees himself clearly. The man changes. The man becomes whole. This is the version of the story that motivational content sells, and it is a partial lie. Or more precisely, it is a truth that arrives so quickly it bypasses the actual terrain of transformation and leaves the reader with a map of a country they have never visited. The reality of what happened to Marcus over the following 2 years was not clean. It is important to say this plainly. There is a counter-argument to everything that has been said so far, and it deserves to be heard without being immediately dissolved by the philosophy that surrounds it. The counter-argument is this: perhaps the superior man is not as superior as he believes. Perhaps what looks like depth from the inside is, from the outside, simply a refined form of disconnection. Perhaps the man who stops explaining himself has not transcended the need for understanding. He has merely found an elegant way to protect himself from the vulnerability of being misunderstood. There is a version of Marcus's story in which his withdrawal is not sovereignty, but a sophisticated defense mechanism, in which his silence is not strength, but fear wearing the costume of discipline. Marcus himself arrived at this counter-argument during the 18 months that followed his bathroom mirror revelation. He had begun cautiously to dismantle his constructed persona. He had left a social group that was comfortable but shallow. He had begun refusing professional opportunities that required him to perform competence he found meaningless. He had started reading again, the books that disturbed him, the philosophy that did not offer resolution, the psychology that pointed at wounds rather than prescribing treatments. And in doing all of this, he had become, for a significant period, genuinely difficult to be around. His standards for engagement became exacting. His tolerance for what he privately called noise, superficial conversation, performed enthusiasm, social theater, collapsed entirely. He alienated people who did not deserve alienation. He mistook his own rawness for discernment and his own isolation for elevation. This is the part of existential psychology that the more popular presentations tend to omit. The shadow, once you begin to integrate it, does not make you gentler. Not at first, it makes you volatile and demanding, and sometimes righteous in ways that are as much about unprocessed anger as they are about principle. Viktor Frankl, who earned the right to speak about meaning-making in conditions that most of us cannot comprehend, was careful to distinguish between genuine meaning and what he called existential escape, the use of philosophy as a refuge from the very human work of relational repair, grief, and humility. The superior man is not immune to this. He is perhaps especially susceptible to it because he has the intellectual tools to make his avoidance sound profound. Marcus's therapist, a quiet, systematic man in his 50s who wore the same kind of worn leather shoes every session and who never appeared impressed by anything Marcus said, told him something in their 7th meeting that cracked something open in a way Marcus had not expected. He said, "The man who refuses to be reduced is admirable, but the man who has confused his refusal with his identity is simply building a different kind of cage." Chapter 5. The Discipline of Return. The 3rd year was different from the 2nd. The volatility quieted, not because Marcus resolved the contradictions he had uncovered. He did not, but because he made a decision that was less dramatic than it sounds and more difficult than it appears. He decided to return, not to the reduced version of himself he had spent his 20s constructing, not to the social performance and the shallow comfort in the cold hands, but to the work, to the specific, concrete, unglamorous work of building something real in the world using the tools he actually possessed. In existential philosophy, the concept of thrownness, Heidegger's term, Geworfenheit, refers to the fact that we find ourselves already in a situation we did not choose. We did not select our bodies, our families, our historical moment, our initial psychic architecture. We are thrown into being, and the work of authentic existence is not to escape the conditions of our thrownness, but to respond to them with full presence and chosen commitment. Marcus began to understand his particular thrownness not as a burden to be resolved, but as a structure to be inhabited. His perceptual sensitivity was not a problem to be managed. His difficulty with social theater was not a deficiency to be compensated. These were features of the instrument he had been given, and the question was not how to retune the instrument to match the room, but how to find the rooms the instrument was built to fill. He requested a transfer to a long-neglected department within his firm, a team working on infrastructure projects in low-income districts where the design challenges were genuinely complex, where the bureaucratic resistance was significant, where the work was neither prestigious nor well compensated, but where the quality of the thinking genuinely mattered. His colleagues found this decision confusing. He did not explain it. This was not the silence of a man who had given up on being understood. It was the silence of a man who had become more interested in the work than in the narrative of the work. There is a meaningful difference. He began waking at 5 in the morning, not as a performance of discipline, but because the early morning hours were the ones in which his thinking was clearest and the ambient noise of the world had not yet begun to accumulate. He spent that time reading, sketching, walking through the districts he was designing, physically present in the spaces he was trying to improve. He developed what he privately thought of as non-negotiable hours, time that belonged entirely to the work and to his own development, protected not with aggression, but with the quiet consistency of someone who has decided what matters and acts accordingly. He stopped waiting for motivation and started respecting structure. The self-mastery that emerged from this period was not the self-mastery of suppression. He had tried that in his 20s and understood its cost. This was something more precise, the self-mastery of a man who has located his center of gravity and learned to move from it, rather than constantly compensating for its absence. Chapter 6. What the burden actually is. There is a reason this video is titled The Burden of the Superior Man and not The Liberation of the Superior Man or The Triumph of the Superior Man. The burden does not go away. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand, and it is the thing that separates genuine existential psychology from its more commercially palatable versions. Integration does not mean resolution. Becoming yourself does not make the world more comfortable to inhabit. If anything, it makes certain aspects of it more uncomfortable, because you can no longer use the anesthetic of self-betrayal to dull the friction. Marcus, in his mid-30s, was a more capable and more present human being than he had been at any earlier point in his life. He was also more alone in specific ways that he had come to accept without resentment. He had fewer relationships, and the relationships he had were of a quality that the ones he had sacrificed could not approach. He still encountered the exhaustion of seeing clearly. He still sat in meetings where things were approved for the wrong reasons. He still felt the cold quiet of being in a room where no one was speaking the language he found natural. But the relationship to all of this had changed fundamentally. He carried it differently. He carried it the way a man carries a tool rather than a wound. Something useful, something that told him where he was and what the terrain required. The philosopher Albert Camus, writing from within his own form of exhaustion, arrived at what he called the absurd, the confrontation between the human need for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it on demand. Camus did not propose that we resolve the absurd. He proposed that we live within it with full awareness, without false consolation, and without collapse. This is not a triumphant position. It is a dignified one, which is different and in certain ways more demanding. The superior man, and here the term is used not to denote superiority over others, but a particular quality of inner demand, a refusal of the easy substitutions. The superior man lives within the absurd without pretending it has been solved. He acts anyway. He builds anyway. He maintains his standards anyway, not because he has been promised that these standards will be rewarded, but because they constitute the only form of integrity available to him. This is the burden, not the suffering, the commitment, the daily, unremarkable, structurally essential commitment to being fully what you are, in a world that will frequently misread you, occasionally punish you for it, and rarely understand what the effort cost. The burden is that you cannot put it down. Once you have seen clearly, you cannot choose blindness, not real blindness, not the comfortable, functional blindness of the man who has successfully reduced himself to what the room requires. You can perform blindness, but you know, and the knowing once established is non-negotiable. Chapter 7. The Quiet Architecture of a Life. Marcus, at 36, submitted a proposal that redesigned the pedestrian and transit infrastructure of a significant portion of the city's eastern corridor. The proposal was accepted after 2 years of revision, bureaucratic resistance, and quiet persistence. The implementation began the following spring. He was not celebrated for it in any way that would mean anything to someone who did not understand the work. His name appeared in a municipal document. The design was altered in implementation in ways that frustrated him. He went back and revised the next phase accordingly. He had learned, and this is perhaps the most practically useful thing that can be extracted from this entire account, that the work of a man committed to genuine quality is iterative in a specific, unglamorous way. It does not arrive complete. It does not receive its proper recognition in real time. It is built the way large structures are built, slowly with enormous attention to the connections between elements, with the understanding that the visible surface is the last thing to be constructed and the least important. The foundation is what holds. The foundation is invisible. The foundation takes the longest to build, and it is what you are working on during all the years when it appears to observers that you are building nothing at all. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius that the life well lived is not determined by its length or its recognition, but by its fullness, by the degree to which the time within it was genuinely inhabited, rather than passively endured. Seneca wrote this from a position of significant wealth and political proximity, which complicates the purity of the sentiment, but the observation survives the hypocrisy of its origin. Time that is genuinely inhabited is qualitatively different from time that is spent managing appearances, navigating performance, or waiting for conditions to become favorable. The man who has located his center and acts from it is inhabiting his time in a way the man who has not cannot access, regardless of what either of them appears to have accomplished. Marcus had not resolved his loneliness. He had not arrived at a place of permanent equanimity. He still had mornings of profound doubt, evenings of frustration that bordered on something darker. He still occasionally experienced the specific grief of having built something real that would never be recognized as such. He was not past these things. He had simply stopped expecting to be past them, which freed an enormous amount of energy that had previously been spent on that expectation. The burden of the superior man is not different in kind from the burden that all serious human beings carry. It is different in the degree to which it has been consciously accepted rather than unconsciously endured. This is the distinction that existential psychology consistently returns to. Not the presence or absence of suffering, not the presence or absence of difficulty, but the relationship between the self and the conditions of its existence. The man who has not examined himself is not less burdened. He is burdened in a way he cannot see, which means he cannot make considered choices about how to carry it. What Marcus found, and what the tradition of existential thought, from Kierkegaard through Nietzsche, through Frankl, through Camus, has consistently pointed toward, is that the examined life does not become easier. It becomes more fully yours. The weight does not decrease. The hands that hold it strengthen. This is not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously. The man who waits for the weight to lift before he begins living is waiting for a promise that was never made. The man who picks up what belongs to him and walks forward with it, not because he expects to arrive anywhere in particular, but because walking forward with full presence is the only form of peace actually available. That man has understood something that most people spend their entire lives never quite reaching. The superior man is not a type, or a category, or a rank. He is a direction. He is the direction of a person who has decided that the cost of becoming himself, whatever that cost turns out to be, is less than the cost of remaining the performed, reduced, socially legible version that the world finds more comfortable. He has counted this cost honestly, without romanticism. He has not concluded that the journey is pleasant. He has concluded that it is the only journey he can take without spending the rest of his life knowing he chose the wrong road. The burden is real. Carry it anyway. Not because someone told you it was worth it, because you already know it is. You have known it for a long time. That is precisely why it is so heavy.